Chapter 13, Key Issue 3, is about why urban areas are expanding. So to define an urban settlement, the term city defines an urban settlement that has been legally incorporated into an independent, self-governing unit. In the U.S., urban settlements are often known as central cities. And the independent self-governing unit will characterize the city from its suburbs. So here you have the city of St. Louis, and then here you have the urbanized area, and then here are other urban clusters. And this is the metropolitan statistical area. When we look at an urban area, we're looking at the dense core of a census tract, densely settled suburbs, and a low-density land that links the dense suburbs with the core. So you have the city, like the city of West Palm Beach, and then you might have the urban area of West Palm Beach. Or even better, like think of Miami. You've got Miami, and then around Miami, you've got your urban area. So an urbanized area is an urban area with at least 50,000 inhabitants, and an urban cluster is an urban area with between 2,500 and 50,000 inhabitants. So an urban cluster is a little bit smaller, but an urbanized area is much larger. So an urbanized area in Miami would include Miami, the city of Miami, plus all the surrounding suburbs. The U.S. Bureau of the Census created a method of measuring the functional area of a city, and that's known as the Metropolitan Statistical Area, or the MSA. So it includes the urbanized area, the county within which the city is located, and any adjacent counties with high population density and a large percentage of residents working in the central city's county. So Miami is a central city in Florida. And technically, here in Palm Beach County, we are still part of that metropolitan statistical area. So Miami-Dade County would be included in that, as would Broward and Palm Beach County. Some adjacent MSAs overlap, so now they make one giant continuous urban complex. So they call this a megalopolis. This is like north of Boston all the way down to Washington, D.C., that really complex, dense urban area. Most U.S. metropolitan areas have a council of government. This is municipal or local government, and these are cooperative agencies that consist of various local government representatives. When we talk about annexation, that is the process of legally adding land area to a city. So in the 19th century, a lot of cities grew rapidly because they offered better services than in the countryside, things like water supply, sewage disposal, electricity. And as they incorporated rural areas, they were annexing the area. As we look at the density gradient, the U.S. tends to become less and less dense as one ventures further from the city. This is known as the density gradient. So if you were coloring it in a map, you would see here, this is like the densest area here, and then there's less people living out here. So if you're looking at the MSA, right, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. If you're looking at annexation, here was the original city of Chicago. Here it is in 1870, 1890, 1900, 1960, and then 1990. And you can see why Burgess would have maybe given it that concentric zone model. As people started to leave the cities in the 1960s in the U.S., as we had more cars, better highways, wealthier homes built further out west, or west or east or north, right outside of the city, people started to leave and commute into the city, and that left us with something called suburban sprawl. So not only did it leave different ethnic clusters within the city, and it led to what we call the Great White Flight that we already talked about. The book also talks about suburban sprawl. Suburban sprawl is when you have far less people in a metropolitan area, usually in the suburbs, and they're spread out over a larger area. So it's sprawling. This is the progressive spread of development over the landscape. This might happen because people develop lands at different rates. It happens because people's yards are bigger, But suburban sprawl is characterized by things like lack of access to walking. So in suburban areas, when you're looking at suburban sprawl, people are meant to drive. They're meant to park their cars. They aren't meant. You aren't. The city's not. The suburbs aren't really designed around you walking to access things. They're not even always organized well around public transportation. So, like South Florida, we have a lot of suburban sprawl. Think about like if you live close to a grocery store. So if you don't live within technically a food desert, which there are 726 in South Florida, so it's entirely possible you do. Even if you have a grocery store within a half mile or a mile to your house, is it an easy walk? Is it a pleasant walk? Was it designed for you to walk to the store, or was it designed for you to get in a car and drive? This has also led us to suburban segregation. So residential suburbs are segregated in two main ways. One, social class. So usually you have similarly priced houses that are built in close proximity to one another. So this means that you have a specific range of income earners buying homes in one certain area. So you might have an area of less wealthy townhomes, and then you have like big homes, and you have what they call McMansions, or like those really big homes that were built up. And they all look kind of the same, but they're big, and they're $200,000 or $500,000, and they're big, huge homes. And we have a lot of gated communities here in South Florida, so you can kind of see that these residential suburbs are segregated because if you can't afford a $500,000 home, you're not going to live in a neighborhood where all the homes are $500,000 or more. So here's a gated community filled with McMansions, as they call them. We also have residential suburbs segregated in the way we use the land. So residents are separated from the commercial and manufacturing agency activities. So you'll find that manufacturing activities are confined to compact, distinct areas. And there's usually commercial areas, and there might be more than one within your city or suburb. So we have different commercial areas located in Boynton Beach. But we don't have a lot of what's called mixed-use development. So to get to a lot of the stores you need to shop at, you'd have to drive across town to the commercial center. Things like zoning ordinances in the 20th century contributed to the segregation of land uses associated with suburban areas. And land use segregation can contribute to suburban sprawl, again, because you have to travel to get to these different pieces of land. You have to travel to get to a grocery store. You have to travel to get to a doctor. We also, again, have the rise of the car. Cars and trucks permitted large-scale development of the suburbs, and they allowed you to live further from the city center. And we use a lot of cars, not just in our suburbs, but also in a lot of our U.S. cities. So an average city allocated about 1/4 of its land to roads and parking lots. Multi-lane freeways cut a 23-meter path through the heart of a city. And these elaborate interchanges consume even more space. And that means valuable land in the city is devoted to parking cars and parking trucks, which is really a waste of really valuable, expensive land. And again, studies show that the more parking lots you build and the wider you make a road, the more cars will show up. If you give more parking spaces, you'll still have, in 6 months to a year, you'll have a problem with not enough parking again. We look at the idea of the car of the future. Motor vehicles are one of the greatest challenges to reducing urban population in urban areas, or air pollution in urban areas. And so we're looking at alternative fuel vehicles to the market. There is diesel. Diesel engines can burn fuel more effectively, but diesel without proper filters can burn really dirty. You can put out a lot of particulate matter and a lot of nitrous oxides. And also regular diesel is fossil fuels. You could get biodiesel fuel if you bought biodiesel fuel made from vegetable oils, recycled restaurant grease, or we've talked about biofuels made from trash or biodiesel made from algae. You can get hybrid cars. Energy that's otherwise wasted when coasting or braking is reduced because electric engines take over during those instances. So you could do that. Ethanol, something else we talked about, by distilling crops like soybean, corn, and soybeans. We've talked about the problems with growing the crops if it's not equal to the amount of energy that's derived from them. But you could also make ethanol from garbage, literally from like the food waste we're throwing away or paper waste that we're throwing away. And so that might be a better use. We have plug-in hybrids. So the gas engine can recharge the battery, and you can also plug it into an electrical outlet and we have more and more electrical cars coming out. Hydrogen fuel cells. In a hydrogen fuel cell, hydrogen is forced through a polymer electrolyte membrane or a proton exchange membrane, and it combines with oxygen from the air. It makes an electrical charge, so you can run a car on hydrogen. Here's a plug-in hybrid. So these cars can all reduce pollution and reduce our energy use. But the greatest use of traveling within a suburb area or within a center city is to invest more in walking and mixed-use development. So you have you've got residential homes and commercial areas all in one area, and better public transportation. Here you see the different sources of electricity from across the United States, and you can see that Florida is mostly going to use a lot of natural gas. We used to use a lot more coal, so we've switched. When we talk about public transit, the benefits are that in public transit in larger cities, it's better suited than motor vehicles to move a lot of people. Each person on a bus takes up less space than they would in their own car. It's more cost effective. You don't have to worry about parking it. Usually buses can put relatively less pollutants than privately owned vehicles. They're more likely to switch to like natural gas, electric, or diesel, and they're usually more energy efficient. But a lot of people in the U.S. overlook the benefits of public transit because in the U.S., like, cars have really represented a lot of personal freedom for us. So we love cars in the U.S. And so we don't have the best public transportation system because we like to hit the road. Like, think about the number of songs about people driving with their car, out in a car, getting a car. Think about the number of times like getting a car has figured prominently in a movie or a TV show. And so really a lot of our pop culture is tied to our independence and our independence and driving. Here's some examples of different public transportation in different urban areas. And that's it for key issue